Hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And today, I finally get to tick off a film that has existed in my ether for practically my entire life. That one of those films that, when the point comes when you've missed it and somehow not watched it, and yet it's constantly come up in lists and constantly come up on television, you almost feel like you're actively avoiding it. But I can say, happily, that I have finally watched 12 Monkeys. It's funny, really. Of course, I've been talking quite extensively over the last couple of days and weeks about time loops and how time loops are currently the new hot trend within storytelling, within genre storytelling. That they are the device that people want to focus on in respect of exploring different ways we can look at time loops and apply them to other genres, like Palm Springs, which of course is a romantic time loop, or Edge of Tomorrow, which is of course a sci-fi alien time loop, and the idea that time loops are now the device that creators really want to look at. And it's funny, really, because the other thing I've talked about, not so recently, but is the 30-year cycle, is something I've discussed quite extensively. The fact that every 30 years we want to, well, not every 30 years, but we want to reflect culturally on the pop culture or the influences of 30 years ago. And the ideas of 30 years ago, thereabouts. And of course, the reason for that being that a lot of directors and writers and creatives who would have been inspired in their youth have reached an age where they now have the influence over the storytelling broadly of the industry. You know, these are people in their 40s and 50s who now are the ones with the keys to directing the creative visions of storytelling, and of course they want to harken back to things of a certain era that they relate to. So now we're throwing back to the 90s. And those two things kind of converge because, of course, we now have the time loop sort of device. Really, there's a nice link back to films like Terminator, both the Terminator films and 12 Monkeys. And although that these were exploring more broad ideas of time travel and more sort of time loops in respect of cyclical time and determinist time, and the idea of can we escape inevitability if we travel back in time, and that kind of storytelling, that is within itself a kind of time loop. And so that's something that I knew 12 Monkeys was a film about time loops. And of course I knew it was a film starring Bruce Willis. But the thing that I definitely must have known, but hasn't really been at the forefront of my mind, and wasn't when I first started watching it, is that it's a Terry Gilliam film. Now, this is something I must have known. But whereas back when I did the Brazil video, it very much felt like Terry Gilliam's Brazil as a banner. 12 Monkeys, I don't remember 12 Monkeys thinking, oh wow, this is another Terry Gilliam joint. You know, you'll really see, you know, this is something that's important to see if you want to get the sense of him as a director. Now, that might be for me personally because I often conflate 12 Monkeys with the other sci-fi high-concept Bruce Willis film of the 90s, which is The Fifth Element. And there are many parallels between them. Like I say, they're both big, high-concept sci-fi. They both star Bruce Willis in sort of that kind of era. And there's something about the grittiness and the dirtiness of their settings that the visual aesthetic, there are definitely parallels in certain parts of both those films that makes me sort of overlap them. But they do have distinct identities. They're not quite as in line as, you know, one superficially might think. Because yes, when you watch 12 Monkeys pretty much from the first 10 minutes. Going in, as I said, I either didn't know or more likely had forgotten this is a Terry Gilliam film. But within 10 minutes, I'm recognising it and I'm thinking, there's something about the identity of it that was making me find familiarities. And I'm thinking initially Luc Besson, maybe? And of course, that's sort of where my confusion was lying. But it very quickly occurred to me that this is a Terry Gilliam. There's something, like I say, about the grittiness, the dirtiness of it, and just the style, and something about the jackbooted nature of authority and how individual people are crushed by a system that is much greater than they are. That is very, very Terry Gilliam. It's with this, I suppose. I mean, you do have that with, say, the future setting, where with Bruce Willis and all the other people within that system are under the authority of this order that they serve, and there's an authority and, like I said, a jackbooted, almost like controlling system that determines what they do and how they serve. And that really relates back to Brazil. And then, of course, you go back to when Bruce Willis travels back in time to the psychiatric ward. Again, you get that sense of cruelty, that sense of oppression. And, of course, both those things are ideas of, organised systems that are supposed to support and help people, but are being used as tools to either neglect or abuse vulnerable people. And then you have time itself, and time really feels like, almost like the Greek gods of classic theatre, of classic ancient Greek theatre, where they are manipulating individual people and their fates to their own ends. So they have a greater purpose, and that needs to be served no matter what the consequences are for individual men. And this very much is in keeping with that. The time itself is this greater divine authority that requires Bruce Willis to fulfill his purpose, despite the fact that that will be tragic and fatal for him. And yeah, there is something very... I mean, this is the thing that shocks me, is the fact that this film is exactly the kind of storytelling that really appeals to my sensibilities. There is something very melancholic about it. The sense that, of course, and from this point I will say that this is... I will spoil things, but I would recommend seeing this, and it's a very mind-trippy kind of film that I don't think you should know plot points going in, but if you do, it doesn't take away from the experience of exactly how... the delivery of the plot is still so strange and ethereal that it doesn't ruin it by knowing how it all plays out. But as I say, it's all about the cyclical determinist nature of time, and as someone who loves time travel stories and loves the mechanics and is interested in how time travel is used, I'm often frustrated, particularly, as I say, now that we have time loops being the current storytelling mechanism, that it bends to the needs of the writers, so that if, sometimes it is inevitable and sometimes it can be bent or can be resisted. What I like about this, and it's very Gilliam, but that sense that this is all inevitable, this is all fate, that everything from point one, you will know how this film ends. When I say that I don't want to, I'm going to, but you shouldn't know plot beats. Frankly, it lays it out from the beginning that there is something deeply tragic that this film is about. And this isn't going to be a film where, one triumphs against inevitability. This is being a film about why the nature of dreams and memory can haunt you, and how your ending ties into your beginning. Because, of course, The film is about how Bruce Willis as a child sees Bruce Willis's death as an adult, and he's haunted by the vision of seeing his own death, even though he doesn't realise as a child what that is, and how that plays into his memories and into his dreams, and of course, like, unbalances his mind. And what I like, and again, very Terry Gilliam, is the fact that he doesn't. Everything is a little more confused. It has that sense of narratives that sort of interweaving, and you don't always get a sense of consistency in what you're seeing, even though if you were to lay it out flat on a table, you would go, oh, I can see how this leads to this, leads to this. But it's presented in this manic, aggressively sort of over-the-top nature. So you're not entirely sure what is going on or whether it is all going to make sense. But what I like about that is the fact that you get that sense of, dealing with these bigger forces like time travel, that one's mind is unbalanced by the experience of travelling through time. And so, and it definitely plays with the idea of, is this real? Is Bruce Willis just someone who is mentally unwell and thinks he's from the future, and this is, and it's just his sheer force of will is convincing characters like Catherine Hearn and Bruce Willis, and Brad Pitt's character, that he's speaking the truth, or is this real? And is it that travelling through time, and of course, like I say, the haunting of your own inevitable death, all destabilise someone? Because Bruce Willis's character, and again, this relates back to Brazil, in regards of, he presents protagonists like Bruce Willis's character as not necessarily someone who you want to root for, or whose perspective is entirely relatable. You don't quite know if you can trust Bruce Willis's character. You don't know. James Cole, sorry, is his name. Don't always know if you can trust James Cole. You don't know if his intentions are right. He's presented as someone who is violent and aggressive and dangerous, and then his mind is unstable because of either the time travel or immediately ending up in a psychiatric ward and being put onto drugs. But you get that sense of, this person might not have the best of intentions, to the point that even towards the end of the second act, and this is intentionally done to test you, there is a moment where you think he has absolutely murdered Catherine Hearn. That despite the fact that she tried to help him and he's kidnapped her, and she's slowly becoming more convinced of his time travel story. There's a point in which you go, has he just killed her? And the way the editing and the way the narrative suggests, it indicates he has. And then, of course, it's sort of then turned around. But there's a certain amount of time where you genuinely think, I could believe he would do that. And I think that's to its credit, because it's the kind of film where other films you would go, no, they're not going to do that because they're going to play it safe, or they're not going to do that because it makes the character completely irredeemable. This is the kind of film where if he had, and then it had gone in a different direction, it would have made sense for this film, and that's to its credit. And then of course you have Brad Pitt's character, and the fact that this is early stage Brad Pitt, who just oozes charisma, even though he's this manic, someone who is also in a psychiatric facility, and then of course is part of this eco-terrorist group, and he's just so neurotic and manic, but also, like I say, charismatic and controlled and strong-willed, that you can see. Again, this demonstrates exactly why Brad Pitt has gone from strength to strength. But it also indicates something else, which of course it links this. You can see why this went straight on, but went to Fight Club, because again, there's really strong similarities between this character and Tyler Durden, and you can see that sense of the line between someone who is why you'd have this sort of almost cult leader type figure, this guy who, on the one hand, is very unwell, but on the other hand, could convince people that he is the sane one and the rest of the world is not. And I think that's, that shows through Brad Pitt's performance, and he every moment he's on the screen, he is dictating the terms of the story. But yeah, and what I also love about this, and I'm certain that this is a film that benefits multiple rewatchings, but it's the fact, and like I said, it goes back to what I was saying before, everything relates and ties into what has come from the beginning, what we've been told, and the relationship between the past and the future, and certain pieces of information, the way that characters interact with each other. Bruce Willis going back in time, first to the 1990s, then to World War One, and then to 1996. All of his actions directly have a consequence on the future. And again, it brings together the thing of, is time dictating this, or is the organisation that has sent him dictating this? Or was there ever a hope he could change things? The film initially tells you there isn't, there absolutely isn't, that his function is not to change things, but to get information. And yet, the film then is trying to convince you maybe he can. Especially once he's fallen in love with Catherine Hearn. You get that sense of, maybe there's a chance. But again, this is Terry Gilliam here, and this is a dystopic sci-fi, so it's not going to end well. And the beauty is that you see the pieces, the dominoes line up. You see how Bruce Willis going to the psychiatric facility, talking about the army of the 12 monkeys, giving all this information to try and free himself, ends up carrying through to other characters who then take that information on board, and it has this ripple effect on the people around him, and consequently through Brad Pitt, to his father, played by Christopher Plummer, to other characters. And you see how it's not just him going back in time and how things have to happen, it's by going back in time he has caused the inevitability of events, that his going back was inevitable because he needed to go back for everything to fall into place. And I think there is a certain brilliance to that, and a certain artistry to just lining everything up. I'm glad I saw this in relation to Brazil and having them side by side, because it is a real demonstration of, and I think I've said this about other directors, the idea of seeing a much more I forget which director it was, but seeing their European work against their Hollywood work. With this, it's seeing Terry Gilliam, with Brazil being much more a British-centric, a British-funded, Terry Gilliam in control of sort of the narrative there, to 12 Monkeys, which, of course, still feels like a very Terry Gilliam-focused film, but there's something a bit more Hollywood about it. There's something, of course, and it might just be the American cast, but there's something about, there are certain parts of it which, as I say, stuff in the future feels Brazil levels of Terry Gilliam dystopic, and yet as you get through the film, there are certain parts which are more relatable, which are more familiar in a Hollywood sense, and it's interesting seeing his sort of interweave his ideas with this Hollywood story style, and the fact that he still gets his dark, blacker than black ending with apocalypses and the inevitability of death, and sort of the post-traumatic nature of our own life actions. And again, there's such an interesting idea and such a complex and rich theme that I really do hope that, I have enjoyed a lot of the time travel films that I've watched over the last couple of years, but I really want something on the Terry Gilliam scale of darkness and, like I say, dystopic or melancholic sort of style. It's funny, really, because immediately as I was watching this, and I didn't really get this in Brazil, but it's funny how I would love to have seen a Terry Gilliam Hitchhiker's Guide adaptation. And immediately after watching this, I looked up to see if that had ever been floated or whether Terry Gilliam ever considered doing it. And the first article I read was someone writing about how that wouldn't have worked and how Terry Gilliam was not right for Hitchhiker's Guide, which I absolutely don't agree with, because I think there's something almost cruel yet mundane, complicated yet familiar about the way Terry Gilliam, these sorts of stories that Terry Gilliam tells. And I think it would have absolutely suited Douglas Adams and the Hitchhikers, and it's a shame because that's just something that won't ever happen now. But it could, I suppose. In his, he's still working, so he could still do that. But it doesn't feel like that's the way his career has gone. It feels much more like it would have suited the 12 Monkeys era of Terry Gilliam's career. Anyway, I really enjoyed this. It was so appetizing for someone who wants this kind of rich text now and then, and I'm definitely going to be sort of thinking about it, and I'm definitely going to want to rewatch it. But thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit that like button, comment below, and share the video because it's all helping the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded, and check out my back catalogue of over 150 videos. I'm now past the halfway point on my series, so I feel like I should be doing something for that, but I'm not got anything in the pipework planned. Perhaps for 200. Anyway, follow me at Jordan_Woodley on Twitter, where I'm always sharing things about TV shows and films, and I share these videos once they're uploaded to YouTube either the day of or the day after. Thank you for joining me. Take care.